This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with innovation expert Stephen Shapiro, and he talks to me about the difference between innovation and creativity, the innovation process, and the key to a really successful speaking career. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor here, and it's my pleasure today to have Stephen Shapiro. For 20 plus years, Stephen Shapiro has presented his strategies on innovation to audiences in 50 countries and to organizations including 3M, Proctor Gamble, Marriott, Nike, and Microsoft. During his tenure with Accenture, he led a 20,000 person innovation practice before coming to a crossroads in his life. His latest book, Best Practices Are Stupid, was named the best innovation and creativity book of 2011, but it's perhaps for his work as an innovation keynote speaker that Stephen Shapiro is best known. Indeed, he was recently inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame, and his speeches on creating high-performing innovation teams and developing an innovative culture led one former writer at Business Week to declare that Stephen Shapiro is the best presenter of ideas since Tom Peters. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Stephen on the show today. So welcome, Stephen.
Oh, it's great to be here, James. Appreciate it.
So share with our listeners what's going on in your world just now.
Well, right now I'm in Orlando enjoying the beautiful weather, and which is one of the things which, as a speaker, I get to do is when I'm home, I really get to be home and enjoy it. I'm not in an office. I always start my mornings with a nice meditation in the hot tub. So that's what I'm up to, at least this morning so far.
So I'm imagining your life now as a speaker is quite different from when you were working in the world of consulting and you're having to travel and be with clients for periods of time. So what are some of the biggest differences? Maybe there's someone listening here and they're in that world of consulting or in large organizations and suddenly going into the kind of work that you do now. What are some of the big differences?
Well, part of the opportunity that I have right now is I get to pick and choose what I decide I want to do rather than it being forced upon me in many cases. And so what I used to do is I used to be at companies. I remember one project before I left, I was there 4 days a week working, 15 hours a day. And I don't do that now. If companies want to work with me on a consulting basis, it tends to be over the phone. It tends to be very focused on what are the strategic needs and where are their blockages to creating innovation. So I'm on the road less. And when I'm on the road, I'm actually doing things that are not sitting in front of a computer, but rather in front of people. And I actually like being in front of people. I think that's a lot more fun.
And you have this expression I was reading, quit thinking outside the box, find a better box. So when you're going and speaking to organizations and working with them, how do you kind of get them to reframe what they understand by that word innovation? Because it's a word that gets bounded around a lot, but it seems to have different meanings for different folks.
It's a great point because it's usually where I start my speeches is to first get us clear on what we mean by innovation. Innovation is not creativity. They are not the same thing. And in fact, in a lot of organizations, I think creativity has killed innovation. This quest for hundreds, thousands, or tens of thousands of ideas is actually sinking companies because we have a sea of bad ideas and a lot of wasted energy and a lot of effort to be able to get the good ideas shepherded through the process. So innovation and creativity aren't the same thing. Innovation is really, the purpose of innovation is to stay relevant. And from a structural perspective, innovation is an end-to-end process that starts with an issue, problem, challenge, or opportunity and ends with the creation of value. So the issue, problem, challenge, or opportunity to me is the first entry point into innovation. It's not the idea. It is actually what is the opportunity or challenge that we have that if we solved it would create a lot of value for the organization. So when I say find a better box, the better box is actually that question, that thing that if we solved it would unleash massive value for the organization.
And in an organization, who is responsible for innovation? Or is everyone responsible for innovation? Where does that sit? And you're speaking to companies, maybe have many tens of thousands of employees working with them all across the world. Where does innovation sit in that in most organizations?
So innovation is the responsibility of every person. I really do believe that. Now, there might be some people to shepherd you through the process because, again, if innovation is a process, we, just like sales is a process. We have a VP of sales. We have in finance a chief financial officer. So we will have people to help shepherd it, but it's everybody's responsibility. But the mistake that sometimes people make is, yes, innovation is everyone's responsibility, but it doesn't mean you innovate everywhere. One of my big beliefs is that you only innovate where you differentiate. You can't be the best at everything. So an organization needs to figure out, what do we need to excel at? What does the market say is our differentiator? It's the reason why people do business with us, and we put our innovation efforts there and only there, and we use different strategies for everything else.
And one of the you mentioned this difference between creativity and innovation. So I got thinking, when going way back to maybe like the 70s, where you had guys like Edward de Bono, who didn't actually use the word creativity, didn't actually use the word innovation. They came up with something completely different for it. But they worked with many large organizations, but they worked on it from the perspective of kind of creative thinking techniques. That was their way into it. So if everyone is responsible for innovation in an organization, what kind of techniques, or is it technique based, or is it culture based? Where do you get started with in trying to ensure that the organization is best prepared for the coming years?
Well, it is cultural, but I think the best access to culture is process. I do believe that when you implement a process that people can actually understand, then you get something that's repeatable and predictable. And so innovation as a process, to me, is actually a desirable state for a lot of organizations. I say that a lot of organizations are innovation as an event. Innovation as an event means it's when somebody decides to innovate. I have an idea, let's go innovate. But it's very sporadic, it's very ad hoc. Innovation as a process means that we give people the tools and the methods to be able to do what they need to do on a regular basis. And the first step of the innovation process is to define the challenge. And that has two pieces to it. One is to figure out, how do we differentiate? And the leadership of an organization needs to communicate that differentiator down to everyone inside the organization so they can say, what I'm working on is important, or it's not important enough to put new thinking into it. That's the first part of the process. Then once we know what's important enough, then we start rallying around, how do we reframe the challenge? I mean, Einstein reputedly said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 59 minutes defining the problem. 1 minute finding solutions. That's not what companies do. Most companies are running around spending 60 minutes working on problems that don't matter.
Yeah.
So
on that note, then, I mean, I think about something like Blockbuster, for example, who I'm sure they would have people there, the teams there, they would have been thinking about the challenges for their organization, but they got Netflix. They got completely kind of blindsided. So in that, the Einstein thing of like thinking about the question, thinking about the challenge and maybe reframing the challenge. Are there any things when you work with organizations, you speak with organizations, how can they ensure that they're just not reinventing the wheel and just kind of going around the same thing all the time, but actually genuinely looking at what is in the best kind of long-term interest for the all the stakeholders?
Again, that comes back to a process. I do have a process that I use with my clients. I have cataloged over the years a number of lenses that we use to reframe challenges. And like the Netflix Blockbuster example that you're talking about, that comes back to the differentiation at some level. And one of the aspects of differentiation is it has to be disruption proof. So what you start looking at is asking questions instead of saying, what do we offer based on what we've done in the past? Usually one's past success leads to future failure. We start asking questions, who's going to make us irrelevant? And as you start asking these types of questions, you then start circling around and start seeing, wow, okay, well, this is emerging, this is emerging. But unfortunately, one of the problems is expertise is the enemy of innovation. So the more we know about an industry, the more we know about our company, the more we think we know about our customers, the harder it is for us to think differently. And so that's where partnerships externally can be extremely valuable to help us see things that we don't see, help to put a light on our blind spots.
I love that line there that you just meant, that expertise is the enemy of innovation. Because so often we think about more and more specialization happening all the time. So is what you're saying that there needs to be more boundary crossing and finding other things that may be coming from very left field areas to help you innovate in your organizations?
Absolutely. And for two reasons. One is on the question and the other is on the answer. So let's talk about the question first. So you used Blockbuster as an example. We could talk about Kodak. Invented the digital camera. It's the digital camera that's putting them out of business. Sears, which is by most measures is probably the most successful company in the history of the world back in the 60s. What people don't realize is in the US, I know you're in the UK, but in the US, 1 out of every 2 Americans had a Sears credit card in the 1960s. Yet just recently, Sears announced that they may go out of business because they just don't, they're bleeding money. So past success leads to future failure. And the reason is because we start focusing on what we know to be true, what we are good at, rather than what the market actually wants. And differentiation is not an internal conversation. It's actually an external conversation. What is it that the market values and needs? So if we only talk to ourselves, we will be out of business. And then the second half to that equation is that on the solution, there's irrefutable scientific evidence that the breakthroughs, the game changers, the disruptions always come from somebody outside your industry or outside your area of expertise. And there's just so much research on that. If we had more time, we could certainly dig into that deeper.
Yeah, I mean, that's that area there. I think we had a recent guest, Dr. K.H. Kim, was on the show, who wrote a seminal book called The Creativity Crisis, about declining levels of creativity as opposed to innovation in the West. And one of the things that she studied was around looking at Nobel Prize winners. And what she found was that they were obviously smart people, but they weren't the highest levels of IQs. But what they were very good at is what you just mentioned there, is this idea of boundary crossing, of pulling in things from other places and sometimes kind of blindsiding the competition in the process.
Yeah, I mean, that makes perfect sense the way you just described it. And I think in some respects, the boundary crossing happens when you reframe the question. So I really think that, you think about the mantra in most organizations, it's don't bring me problems, bring me solutions. When in fact, I think the better answer is bring me better problems. Bring me meatier problems. And then let's take the time to make sure we're actually working on and solving the right opportunities that we have in front of us. And if we reframe the challenge, we will then almost always have boundary crossing as part of the process through that reframing process.
So you're hired to go and speak all around the world on large conferences as a keynote speaker on innovation. So how do you ensure that you stay inspired and fresh and always kind of developing and always coming up with new things to speak about, new insights? Where does that come from for you?
Well, it's interesting because if expertise is the enemy of innovation, then being an innovation expert means I can't be an expert in innovation, which is it's sort of a weird position to be in. So one of the things which I've recognized, and I call these purposeful tangents, which is to spend a portion of your time, and it doesn't have to be 100%, but spend a portion of your time connecting with people from different industries or disciplines. So for example, there's a group called Pumps and Pipes. And I use this as an example in my speeches because I think it's just so visual. It's a bunch of cardiologists who get together on a regular basis with people from the gas pipeline industry, and they share what they know about the cardiovascular system and how it relates to the transmission of gas. And these are two purposefully put together groups. They're about transmission of a fluid through a tube. So, but this is not a natural act. We actually have to sort of think about it. So I ask myself, what's my purposeful tangent? And I love the brain, so I read books on neuroscience. I'm certainly not a neuroscientist or an expert or anything on it, but I love that. I actually worked for Formula One team for a number of years and studied sports performance and what has people perform at higher levels. But my favorite is actually magic, because innovators, we try to make the possible possible, while magicians can make the impossible possible. And if you can start innovating the way a magician innovates, you're going to start developing solutions, or at least processes for developing solutions that will be fundamentally different. And so I like to learn not just from the world of innovation, but from other disciplines that I think could have input and value.
And I mentioned at the top of the show, your time at Accenture, you led a very large innovation practice there, 20,000 person innovation practice. But something happened. Can you talk about that incident, that point in your life where you said, actually, I want to take a different path now?
Well, there are actually two different times during my Accenture career where I decided to take a different path. One led to the creation of the 20,000 person group, and the other one was when I left. So the first one to me is actually the more powerful one. It's the one which has really driven almost everything I've done for the past over 20 years now. In the early 90s, I was involved in business process reengineering, which basically was a form of business optimization. We made companies efficient.
Yeah, I remember doing that. I remember doing it. I did all my MBA stuff. It was Norton and Kaplan business process. That was a really big thing for a while. This idea of dashboards and how organizations could run.
Right, and you had Michael Hammer and Jim Champy reengineering the corporation. So these were really this was in fact, at that time, in the early 90s, it was the predominant, I'll call it the fad, the movement of the time. And what I realized was I was this leader inside of Accenture promoting reengineering. I was going around to projects. I was promoting this, and people were losing jobs. Like hundreds of thousands of people were losing jobs. And I started to see the impact of people losing jobs. And I woke up one day in a project and I just realized I'm destroying lives and I don't want to do that anymore. And so I actually walked off the project. I took a leave of absence. And I spent about 6 months trying to figure out, what do I really want to do with my life? And I realized I loved speaking. I loved traveling around. I loved promoting something, but I wanted to promote growth. So innovation wasn't much of a word back in the early 90s, but I decided to create this movement around growth and innovation, and we grew it to 20,000 people, and I stayed with that till basically 2001 when I wrote a book and decided to leave and branched out on my own. So it's that first one, though, in creating the 20,000 person practice, that was the biggest for me, because that was a massive change just philosophically in terms of what my life stood for.
So was there a tension there, though? Because in big business, obviously your responsibility is to your shareholders first and foremost in terms of providing value for them. So I can understand why that business process reengineering and going through that and shedding all those jobs, that may have been what the board and the shareholders actually wanted at the end. So did you come? Was there a tension going on there? Where you're coming to actually, no, I think rather than just letting we need to actually develop new product lines, new innovations.
Of course. I mean, it still happens to this day. Certainly, it's a little bit less now than it was, let's say, 2008, 2009, 2010, as the economy is getting stronger. Innovation seems to be coming back to the forefront more. But look, there are always times when companies want to retract. Even Accenture, when I brought them the idea of let's create a practice around innovation growth, they looked at me like I had three heads. And the reason why it took 6 months is because I needed to find somebody who would support creating something like this. And unfortunately, I met a couple of very, very, very senior partners who loved the idea. They were given a group that they needed to do something with, and we somehow created on the back of that. So look, it takes tenacity. It takes, obviously proving your case that what we're working on is valued. And not every company is ready for it. Not every company wants it. But the way I look at it is it's what my life is about. My life is about helping companies grow, and I'm not going to compromise on that ideal. And
that next chapter in your life, from moving from being in the consulting world to being a speaker, being on stages all over the world. For anyone that's listening to this just now, that is maybe in that point in their life where maybe they've got a 9-to-5 job, they're doing something, and they want to get out there and speak maybe on the subject that they currently work on or on something completely different. Are there any tips? And I say this as well because I know you were awarded put into the Speaker Hall of Fame, which is an incredible accolade as well. So I'm asking this of someone that's both gone through it and is also really at the top of their tree.
Well, there's a few things that I learned when I was at Accenture. By the time I left, I'd probably been speaking for close to 10 years, in front of audiences of 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, 10,000 people. So I was traveling around a lot, giving a lot of speeches to a lot of large groups, and I knew I was good. The first thing I learned, though, is being a great speaker does not mean you have a great speaking business. The speaking business is actually first and foremost a marketing business, and then it's a speaking business second. And so that was the first thing that I learned is it takes time. You have to build your relationships and build your contacts and build your intellectual property and your body of work and everything else. And that takes, it doesn't happen overnight. The second thing which I learned, which I guess surprised me, is, I guess it shouldn't surprise me, but Oscar Wilde once said that a cynic knows the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And I really got that early on when I lost a job because I did not charge enough. My very first opportunity for a speech, I did not charge enough. And therefore, in the minds of the buyer, I wasn't good enough. Now, I didn't charge a lot because I was starting off and didn't even know what to charge. But people value people. If I go in and I say, like, even there's so many studies, and even with wines, if you take the identical wine and tell people one is a much more expensive wine than the other wine, and when they do fMRIs on the brain, actually study the brain, they see that the pleasure centers light up more on the expensive wine, even though from the taste perspective, the brain knows they're exactly the same. So just this concept of value to me always is shocking in terms of how it's perceived in the market.
And then in that journey that you went into the speaking side, was there a kind of a seminal moment when you went, actually, it's working? Things are starting to happen now. Was there an incident or a time or a call that you got or an email that you got that went, okay, it's clicking now?
I'm not sure I'm there yet. What I will say is when I started my business in 2001, I hired somebody who was sort of an expert in helping speakers. And I asked her, I said, what is the key to a really successful speaking business? And she said to me, 10 years. And I thought that was a strange answer. And I decided I was going to prove her wrong. But the reality is it was the 10-year mark when things started to take off. And I don't think 10 years is some mystical or magical number. I think in my case, it was just because that's how long it took for me to get enough contacts for things to really start boiling and for my reputation to build up. And you get sort of an exponential growth at some level. Now, I think today with social media and everything else, people can do it certainly a lot faster. But back when I was starting, which was 2001, social media, none of those things really existed. So it was a more deliberate and laborious process. And I think the key that a lot of people, at least for me, and again, this is only my experience of the world. It's not the experience of the world. My experience is that who knows you ultimately leads to your success. Because when I do an analysis each year of my bookings for each year, 70 to 90% of my bookings are either from people I've done business with before, people who are in an audience of a speech, people who are recommended by a past client or a bureau I've done work with in the past. So my past relationships seem to carry me year after year after year. And in the beginning, I didn't have enough of that.
It's just kind of building up that kind of critical mass, I guess, as well. You one of the things I know you speak about, one of the themes is personality, the role of personality in innovation as well. And I was reading your story. That the kernel of that idea came from a little incident in Las Vegas. Not the first place you think of when you think of innovation. So can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Sure. So about 15, 16 years ago, I had a personality test that I had developed specifically around innovation. Because one of the beliefs I used to have is there's some people who are innovative and some people who aren't. And what I discovered is that's absolutely not true. Everybody's innovative. We just contribute in different ways, and we tend to collapse innovation and creativity. So if we separate creativity from innovation and look at innovation as a process, well, there are people who are good at asking questions. There are people who are good at solving problems. There are good at people who are working at the implementation, and there are people who are good at relating to people to get the work done and spread the word. So I had this spreadsheet version of this personality test, again, specifically designed around innovation. Boring as all hell to do, though, like most personality tests are. And one day I'm sitting at the Venetian in Las Vegas. I had just been thinking about this. Fortunately, I had been working on it, and I made this connection between the 4 suits and a deck of poker cards with the 4 steps of the innovation process. And basically, I went back and started doing iterations and testing it out and trying different words and different methods. And eventually, we came up with something we call personality poker, which is a specially designed deck of cards where everything has meanings. The suits, the colors, the numbers, they all have meaning and help you very quickly assess not just your own personality, but actually the culture of your organization, the composition of your team to make sure you're playing with a full deck. I mean, there's just a lot of things that you can do with a very simple deck of cards.
Yeah, I think that was the bit that interested me, that sense of not just knowing your own innovative kind of personality type, but also seeing in terms of your team when you're either constructing a team or you're working your current team. Well, am I too much this? Do we have too many people of this particular type? Do we have not enough people of this type? And as a result, the projects aren't happening, or we're not getting enough kind of new things coming through. I thought that was the part for me as I was looking at it. See, that must have huge benefits to those organizations that are going to go and use this material.
Well, what I found is we can just play a game of poker and quickly diagnose where companies struggle with innovation. Because again, it's not at the individual level. We look at the team and the organization level. So we can look at very quickly, like if we use the cards and the words, we can assess what the organization's personality is, their culture. And that gives us some blind spots. To me, it's all about figuring out what your blind spots are, because every person and every organization has them. And if we can illuminate them, then we can increase our capacity to innovate and grow.
So as we start to kind of finish up here, I'd like to ask you a question, the Peter Thiel question, which is, what is the one thing that you believe about, in this case, innovation, that others in your industry think is completely insane?
I think most of the things I think a lot of people think are insane, but I mean, I talked about a few of them that don't think outside the box, find a better box. Expertise is the enemy of innovation. But I'll give you one other one, which only because it seems to be the vogue thing these days. Everybody loves failure. And I hear everybody say failure's a good thing. And I mean, look, fail fast, fail forward, throw whatever word you want in with it. But I think failure's terrible. I think it's the wrong mindset. We don't want to fail. I think we want to experiment. And the reason why innovation fails as often as it does is because we are, as human beings, not designed to create powerful experiments. So I think this concept of failure is just so overblown. And I think if people use the right process, they should be mitigating and minimizing failure and becoming much better at experimenting. And I think here's the problem that I have, and I think the reason why we fail so much, and then we like to justify it, is a quote from Scott Cook at Intuit. He said, "For each of our failures, we had spreadsheets that looked awesome." And I love that quote because we can justify anything, but that doesn't mean we should.
And on that note of experimenting, do you have any online resources or tools or apps, things like Evernote or Gmail that you love and you don't think you could live without now?
There's actually quite a few that I really enjoy. Being a traveler, TripIt Pro is certainly the one that I use the most. Actually, I'll pull up my phone because let's see which ones are right on my front screen. Any kind of good sleep app, like Rain when I'm in a hotel and I can't sleep. Very important to have a good white noise app and a jam box or some kind of Bluetooth speaker. I think that's critical. But in terms of productivity, what's interesting is I'm not really very good at using most of those apps. Here's the one thing which has saved my life, though, is a combination of SaneBox and Follow Up Then. And they have some similar features, but I use them for different reasons. Basically, SaneBox, I use it as a tool which scans through all my emails and says what looks like it's actually a newsletter, what's something which I can look at later, and actually sticks it in a separate folder. So all of my newsletters, all of my spam, anything that it doesn't think is important, sticks it in a separate folder. So my inbox is relatively clean. And then with Follow Up Then, I love this because what it allows me to do is say, I'm not ready to work on this now, but I want to follow up in 1 week, 1 day, 1 month at 6 p.m. And I basically just forward the email to 6 p.m. at Follow Up Then, and at 6 p.m. it pops back into my mailbox. Or if I'm writing a client and I'd say, hey, let's follow up in 6 months in the BCC, I'll put 6 months at Follow Up Then. send it off, and in 6 months, I just got one this morning, which is a reminder to contact a client who said to call them in 6 months. So it's changed my life. My inbox is empty, and that's to me really important because things also don't fall through the cracks.
Wonderful. We'll put all these on the show notes. People just go to jamestaylor.me, type in Stephen Shapiro, and you'll find all these links as well. So let's imagine if you were to recommend just one book to our listeners and actually one record, one album, what would they be?
So the book would be Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman, which is the stories of a Nobel Prize winning physicist. And it's just absolutely fantastic reading. It's to me one of the best books on creativity. And it is absolutely ridiculously funny. You wouldn't expect this uber nerd to be doing, playing bongos in South America or trying to become a safe cracker at Los Alamos and other places. It's just a really fantastic book. As far as music, I don't have anything in particular that comes to mind. I just like music that gets me in a good mood. So I'll just give a band that most people won't know that just every time I listen to their music, they make me smile. They're called Here Come the Mummies. It is a band of unbelievably talented musicians who are dressed like mummies. Nobody knows who they are. Their real names don't exist anywhere on the record notes or anything. And they are I've seen them in concert every time I can. And every time I listen, I just smile, even if I'm upset.
Wonderful. I'll put these on the show notes as well. So final question for you, Stephen. Let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So you've got all the tools of your trade, all the knowledge that you've acquired over the years, but no one knows you. You have to start again. How would you restart?
I think the key to restarting is to first look outside myself, not inside myself. So really understand what it is that the world needs that the world currently doesn't get and that the world is willing to pay for. So I think I would start there, and then I would start to match that up with what I'm good at and what I like to do. So I always call this the passion, skills, value equation. I have to love what I'm doing. I have to create values for other in a way that will create value for me. And I have to at least have the skills, or at least be able to acquire the skills to do that. And if I start from there, I think I'd probably at least move in the right direction with what I'm creating. And that's usually the advice I give people. I'll do just a quick plug while we're here. There's a TV show coming out in the U.S. called Girl Starter. It actually starts on April 28th on Fridays, and I'm one of the judges and mentors for this show. And it's great to see 19, 20, 21-year-old women starting their own businesses. And basically the question you just asked me is the question that they have to answer for themselves. What would they love to do with their life? What's the purpose of their life? But how do they create value in the minds of others at the same time? And
finally, Stephen, where should people go to learn more about you, the work that you do, and all the information you're mentioning just now, and some of these new projects you're involved in?
And the easiest place is just steveshapiro.com. That will give you all the information. You can get to all the other products. A couple places, though, which are buried inside the website that you might be interested in is personalitypoker.com. And in particular, personalitypokergame.com. This is actually it's a free online video game we created that looks like a slot machine in Las Vegas, which allows you to simulate the personality poker system within like 30 seconds, and you get a printout of your personality.
Wonderful. Well, we'll put all these links on the show notes as well. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today and learning more about innovation and the innovation process. Thanks so much. I wish you all the best on your future keynote speaking and books.
Thanks. It was a pleasure.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.